Good morning. Very pleased to be here with you, not only because this topic is very interesting and important in my mind, but because we're also having an election today, you might have heard, in the United States, and I'm very happy to be away from the robocalls. And I have to say there's some good news. We have gone from hope to cope, so we can tell you about coping. And the joke in the United States is that there's also no malign foreign influence or interfering in our elections because we're doing it ourselves. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. We have a diverse panel, speaking of connecting silos, of distinguished leaders in the private sector, public sector, space, business, insurance, and government. And the focus of this conversation will be on the vulnerabilities and the threats that we face in modern deterrence. And I understand there will be other panels that will focus more on solutions and what else can be done. So let me begin by introducing, starting to my left, Roeland Baan, CEO and president of Outokumpu, leading producer, a global producer of stainless steel with operations in 4 continents. I need my glasses now. And Mr. Mark Dickinson, who is our expert in space, Inmarsat's Vice President of Space Segment and Deputy CEO. He is CTO. CTO, I thought so. He's the current chairman of the Space Data Association, which is an international organization that brings satellite operators to support the controlled, reliable, and efficient sharing of data critical to the safety and integrity of the space environment. Eric Schuh is the managing director and global head of PNC Solutions at Swiss Re, and Lord James Arbuthnot, member of the House of Lords, former chairman of Defense Select Committee and former defense minister, and currently active in the private sector in, among other things, as chair of the advisory board of Thales UK. So with that, I would like to begin. Perhaps we can begin with Roeland, to my right. So, and I'm going to my left. And as a business leader of a global business, I think businesses have to deal with a variety of challenges depend on the smooth functioning of the supply chain, manufacturing, and distribution, and other challenges that they face. What has been your experience in the vulnerabilities that you face today, for example, with cyber or issues that would relate to modern deterrence? What have you seen, Roeland?
Right. So for us as a business, if you talk about vulnerability, you have 2 things. Mainly, it's not so much on supply chain. Those things can be tackled, you can react, but fundamental vulnerability and threats are industrial espionage, where basically your secret recipes are being taken away. And the other one, even more severe, is sabotage. We operate 14 steel mills around the world. These things produce anywhere from 2 million to 6 million tons of steel. They're actually easily sabotaged. If you run the core piece of it, which is the hot strip mill, it's called, if you run that wrongly, you run it into the ground and you have a whole mill down for a long time. So our biggest threat is then the cyber side. Both, not completely, either people who get physically access to your company or people who get electronically access to your company. Now, on both we do a lot. If you look at the physical access, wherever you go, you need a badge to get in, you need a badge to actually get to a certain floor, then you need a badge to get into the office itself. So pretty neatly done. Same on the cyber side, where we do continuous security assessment of systems. We do threat intelligence, where you use process and procedures to review potentially accounts of risk, We do log management, identity and access management, all that sort of stuff to avoid that the wrong people can get into your system. And it sounds great, and it's a little bit about responsibility that we talked about earlier. So that's all we can do. We can build an enabling environment, but ultimately it is up to the individuals that work in our company whether this will work. And as an example, we had about 2 years ago, we approached a cybersecurity firm and said, we would like you to deploy somewhere in the next 6 months, it's your choice, a red team and see where you can breach our company, our systems, physically our company, etc. So they came back after about 5 months and said, we're done. And I said, fine, let's have it. And it was absolutely shocking. Just already in the physical security, the ease with which they actually entered our company by standing in the lobby, hanging around, tailgating someone through the doors. No one saw that. Waiting at the elevator, getting in, someone patches to a certain floor, and they are roaming around on that floor until someone enters the offices themselves, and as these doors swing open and swing slowly back, the person is already long gone by the time these people are in. And once they're in, you're really in trouble, because your employees are not that security conscious. So they found a badge lying around. You can copy that electronically, and then they had badges for themselves to go in and out of the building every time of day, whatever they wanted. So there were 4 of these guys running around. No one ever asked them who they were until they found an unlocked computer. They downloaded 11,000 email addresses and then went home and worked their magic. And within 24 hours, had cracked about 70% of all the passwords. And within a week, they had more or less the other 30%. Now, this is funny, I have to look this up, but if you look at the passwords, 35% are completely ridiculous. So password number 1 occupied 13% of cases was password. And number 2 was 11%, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 3 was stainless, which at least is a little bit more creative. And the last one, with another 7%, was welcome 1, 2, 3. So it was very easy, but even, and this is the scary thing, even the passwords that were 18 characters long with letters, numbers, special characters, they got them. Just it's a matter of enough time and enough computing power, and they get through. So one of the things we said to them is we operate a so-called manufacturing execution system. That's the heart of your operations. It's central, it's one system, it's linked between all the mills. As I said, we have 14 of these things around the world. And we said, we would like you to see whether you can get in through whatever access you can find, but don't go in, it's too dangerous. Because indeed, if you get into the manufacturing execution system, then literally you can speed up this famous hot strip mill, that is at the core, the heart of your equipment. You can speed it up to 3 times the speed. You run, normally there's about 3 kilometers of metal in such a thing. You just run it through, it destroys the machine, it probably kills a lot of people, it destroys the other machines around it as well. It will take out of commission a mill for 6 months, a year, whatever, at enormous cost. And they had, I think they found 7 entry points to get through the back door into these systems. Very scary. And then you get back to your security. You can do whatever you like to get to enable a secure environment. If your people do not respond to it, don't have the responsibility, do not have the knowledge or the willpower to do it, you are as vulnerable as if you were an open system. And again, just to bring that home, if someone wants to do evil and just kill one of our mills, then I would say it's an act of terrorism. Nothing is really done. But if you realize that in Europe, the 10 largest steel mills, I'm not talking stainless, I'm talking steel in general, the 10 largest steel mills produce about 50% of demand in the European market. About 80 million tons, 70, 80 million tons a year. If you target those 10 and you wait until one moment that you say, let's get them all down, we have 70 million tons of steel not delivered, 200,000 tons of steel a day. The knock-on effect is tremendous. And then it's an act of war suddenly. It's not terrorism anymore. And it sounds all theoretical, but then I'll stop. I'm on the board of a large offshore company, one of the leading offshore companies. They specialize in floating deep water production and storage systems. Enormous things, basically the size of 2 VLCCs. Highly technological. These things are operated by 20 people on board because the rest is done remotely through again, manufacturing execution systems. We have about 38 of these things. If you remember Deepwater Horizon, just the one platform, much smaller than any of these, what the damage that caused, environmentally, economically, etc. If you could actually do that times 39 on all these vessels, you have an enormous disaster, not only ecological, not only environmental, not only economical, but just impure the balance of supply of energy. And it's not theoretical because we were actually about a year and a half again approached by the Secret Service in the country where this company is headquartered. And they said, you have been attacked by an outfit called APT-28. Now, there's probably a few guys here know it. It's also known as Fancy Bear, and it's connected to, they say it's Russian, it's connected to the GRU. Now, we investigated, we never noticed when it happened, but after this warning, we worked together with the security guys, and we found traces, fingerprints that they had tried to come in. They hadn't gotten into our servers, our firewalls had kept them out, but it just shows that there is probing, and that ultimately when you find someone talking about deterrence that doesn't have the systems that are strong enough, then we run a very large risk. So that's from a business perspective how I see the vulnerability.
Thank you very much. Eric, let me go to you while we stay in the private sector, because you will be the provider of exactly the type of insurance which I imagine Roeland's company would want to have or does have. And the business of insurance, I also think that you're probably in a better place to understand cyber than most other businesses, because you're in the business of assessing the probability of risk and also pricing insurance for cyber and so forth. And also you really have to look at insurance both as a business, at cyber, both as a business and as a peril. So could you talk a little bit more about how do you see the vulnerabilities of cyber in particular and to the insurance industry, because you stand to suffer heavy losses if you as a major stakeholder in this problem cannot help forward some solutions to this.
Very glad to do so. Thank you very much. I brought actually 3 visuals to underline that. Could somebody... okay, right. So I'll step forward to the lectern then. So before I... okay. They should say something about insurance.
Oh yeah, I have marked down for the next week.
Exactly. So while we're pulling up those, if I may, I wanted to actually link to. Yeah, that's the correct one. Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to link to the keynote speak quickly in terms of what's really going to happen in the future, and I had the privilege of spending a few years working in the UK and also a few years working in China. I was there just last week for 2 weeks actually in China and Asia, And you know what's interesting? When I took a cab yesterday, I wanted to pay the fare, so I pulled out my money and wanted to pay, and the cab driver said, "Well, sorry, you can't use that anymore." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He said, "We replaced the £10 bill with a new one. The new one is like this, plastic." And I'm like, "Okay, so what do I do with that?" And he's like, "Well, you have to go to the bank, da-da-da." So let's see when I have time to go to the Bank of England to get that replaced. But my point is that this is not useful anymore because they introduced a new bill. Now, in China, if you, I just happen to have a few renminbi on me as well. You know, if you want to use that in China, you know why it's not useful anymore? Because everyone is paying with that and not with that anymore. So you can actually pay a beggar on the street with a phone. They have a QR code and they will scan it and it's okay, right? If you heard of WeChat and Alipay. So I think to the point of what's really going to happen next and whether we are in the leading spot of these developments, I also have my serious doubts that we are actually. But what I would say is that if there's any place that is on their toes and resilient and equipped with a sense of urgency to actually do something about it, then from my experience it would be here in London, where people then at least start doing something about us falling behind some of these developments. So anyways, Swiss Re is probably best known in the UK for our iconic building that we built in the city, the Gherkin, which is not owned by Swiss Re anymore, by the way, but we still occupy quite a big part of it. But Swiss Re, of course, is a big reinsurance company and a company that insures insurance companies. And what you do as a reinsurance company is, on the one hand, you insure big risks. So basically, you assume risks from your clients, your insurance companies globally, and then sometimes that can be very large events like hurricanes, you know, that create big disasters. But sometimes you also think it's you're going to insure, for example, Y2K, that was mentioned as well. And that those are big projects. But then what was the real big insurance loss was I was an equity analyst here in London when that happened in a St. James's Square rented office when we were standing in front of a TV and saw planes flying into the World Trade Center. That cost a company like Swiss Re a few $1 billion, just us, right? Not the whole market. And I don't want to talk just about the money. We know what it all cost. Other than that, so you never know what the next thing really is going to be. In terms of cyber insurance, I wanted to show this visually because it's, as often in insurance, maybe not second nature to everyone to see what we're doing. If you think of cyber as an insurance sort of relevant topic, then it breaks into these three things: first-party coverage, third-party coverage, and services. First-party coverage is things like business interruption, data restoration, cyber extortion. So basically, if something happens to your business and you can't operate, this is a big problem because business interruption can be caused by a targeted attack on a steel mill, for example, but it can also be caused by something like, for example, Amazon Web Services being down and therefore affecting thousands of businesses at the same time. And obviously, if you can't conduct your business, all of you who are self-employed will know that there's actually no holidays and nobody keeps paying you, right? You're just out of business for the time until you're back in business, and therefore you need that insurance coverage. Third-party coverage is about loss of data, and things like that. So data gets stolen, or if you're a software company and you're producing code and the code is defect and causes losses somewhere else, a classical liability coverage, third-party liability. And then you have services that you require. If you think of hotlines, and if something happens, you need to respond. You need probably PR agencies and things like that. So if you think of cyber from an insurance point of view, we have to look at these different things. So to make it very easy, if all of you presumably, well, also that is changing, right? But all of you are probably still driving a car or at least have driven a car before. First party coverage is if you buy the comprehensive insurance and you create damage to your own car and you get it repaired and the insurance pays for it. Third party is if you hit somebody and you have to pay for their hospital bills and so on. And then the services would be like assistance and so on, somebody towing you away and so on. Now, the way this works for insurance company, and I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I think if we don't explain this, it's too nebulous a concept. You do different things when you look at a risk, and cyber in that context is a risk. So you look at the product you need a policy to insure against cyber, something that you can sign and then you have coverage for it. Then you need to underwrite it, you need to assess the risk and determine how much money you should take for insuring that risk. That is called costing. The marketing we as a reinsurance company don't do usually, our clients do that because they would sell to you. Then if there's a claim, you have to also pay the claim, that's called claims handling. And then the last one is called accumulation management, meaning if indeed, like let's assume a big web provider is down, how is that affecting then maybe 10,000 policies at the same time? Now, for that you have different products. In our case, I wanted to show you what a cyber analytics platform can do, and it doesn't matter if it's ours or somebody else's, but you have to determine what the likelihood is of that steel mill to be attacked. And it's a bit difficult to read, but it also tells us that we need a lot of very young people to to be discussing these topics. Otherwise, they can't read the visuals. There's a motivation. So why would somebody attack a steel mill? I know a lot of reasons why people would want to attack Microsoft, for example. But maybe also a steel mill is a good target. But maybe you're a business that just doesn't make sense to attack because there's nothing to be had, both in terms of real value, if it's about criminal activities, or fame, if it's more like hackers boasting then that they hacked something. And then there's the other element of vulnerability, meaning how easy is it to hack such a company. And as we just heard, it's probably impossible to protect yourself completely against somebody who really wants to get in. But then the other question is, how likely is it that people are going to do that? Because also hackers, also governments have opportunity cost, right? And then you can basically assess where that red dot basically is now one risk, and it sits in amongst other risks, and there's some risks that are more vulnerable and some risks that are more likely to be attacked. And then if you do that for many, many risks, you can calculate what that means for a portfolio and how much money you should charge, for example, that company versus another company. So in a nutshell, this is what cyber insurance is about. First party, third party, determine what the vulnerability is, what the likelihood is of somebody getting attacked. So that is a business. This is very different from cyber warfare or things like that, right? So what we are here for is to work with the private sector to help with things like that, like you buy life insurance, like you buy motor insurance. And then there's these big world events that sometimes can overlap with things that we do for business. To give you two final numbers, the world market for cyber insurance currently is about $3.5 billion in insurance premium paid, of which the vast majority, 2.9 billion, is driven out of the US, 0.4 out of Europe, 0.2 billion out of Asia. That number, $3.5 billion, is going to grow to $20 billion by 2025. So that's a very fast growth rate for the insurance sector. But I give you one other number. The motor insurance premium globally in 2015 was $700 billion. So if there's a call for action that more needs to happen in the space of cyber, also in the financial services industry, in insurance, it's clear that maybe going forward the cyber industry should not be a 200th, 3.5 billion versus, did I calculate that right? 20th, no? 200th, is that right? Yeah, 200th, yeah, correct. I'm not a mathematician, but clearly it shouldn't be a 200th of the motor insurance market, probably, considering where the world is going. That's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. Is there any order you wanted me to go in?
Well, Mark is the only other person with PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I'll get his ready.
Do you want him to go next?
Doesn't
Doesn't matter, you're all making great points, so. Mark? Yes, please, if you need to stand up. And I wanted to ask you about the role of space in modern deterrence. You recently wrote what I thought was a really interesting piece where you talked about countries increasing reliance on capabilities that are delivered from space systems. So could you elaborate on capabilities and systems that could be affected by satellite disruption? And also, what are some of the significant threats to space operation?
Okay. Thank you. I'll try and address those important questions. So I'm going to touch a bit on cyber, but space has other threats as well, apart from cyber. So I'm going to try and paint a picture. If you're in space and you have assets, what you have to worry about. There's a phrase that's often used that space is congested, contested, and competitive. And that's ever more the case. And why is that important? You touched upon society this morning and the capabilities that we need in society. In large areas of society now, space plays a fundamental role in delivery. Think of navigation, think of Earth observation, telecommunications. People don't really realise how space is embedded in their life. With your smartphone, it's unlikely to work unless there's some sort of space segment element to it. Certainly no navigation. Earth observation for weather forecasting, natural disasters, Google Maps, who can survive out Google Maps these days, and telecommunications. So it's deeply embedded in society. And there was recently a study published last year that said that the UK economy, if there was a 5-day outage only to navigation services, would cost the UK economy £5 billion. So it's a big deal. So we have this huge, society's now become the space has become deeply embedded within these capabilities that society needs. So we need to protect the space environment. And this has been recognised since the very dawn of the space age, really. In 1959, the UN General Assembly set up the Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And that has published a number of treaties, and it's trying to allow space to be used for the future for safe and peaceful means. It's looking at peace, it's looking at development, it's looking at security for humanity as a whole. That's its remit. That's all well and good, but we know the militarization of space continues. There's plenty of examples of that happening. In fact, there was a satellite launched last year which has gone and done close inspections of other people's satellites without coordination. And close, I mean within a couple of 100 meters. So that capability is new and is a threat that needs to be managed. And that comes along as part of sort of what we call Space 2.0. Space is a rapidly developing technology environment. You see SpaceX launching rockets and now landing them. You see Jeff Bezos talking about launching hundreds of people into space. You're also seeing commercial companies coming along with capabilities to be able to remove debris, and I'm going to touch upon what debris happens and why it's important to us, and also servicing. So there's someone out there who will sell you a service to come to your satellite and try and refuel it. That's clearly a dual-use technology. If I'm coming up and attaching myself to your satellite, then I can also disable it. So the management of this new technology and new capability is vitally important. Cyber is super important. I work for Inmarsat, with a satellite communications company based a couple of miles away from here. We now have more cyber people doing operations than we do spacecraft people. That's because we know the importance that is for us, but also to our customers. So how do you solve this problem? We've got capabilities being deployed in space. We have a bunch of debris flying around in space that we're going to have to try and avoid in collision. What can we do to try and mitigate that risk? And the key element to how you can address this is called space situational awareness. It's knowing what's up there and where it's going to be in the future and how to avoid it. So I've got one chart only. It's showing the population of debris that's surrounding the Earth at the moment. These are all the satellites that are passed quite close to the Earth in LEO orbit. This is now going to be an animation showing the classification from large objects down to small objects. And currently today, we track roughly 4% of the objects larger than 1 centimetre in space. Now, a 1 centimetre object can cause you real damage if you're a spacecraft, and can severely degrade your capability. So the tracking of these objects is super important. Knowing where these objects are going to be in the future is very important. And if we're only tracking 4% of them, we've got a capability gap. And typically SSA has been provided historically by the US Defense Department, and you can go to spacetrack.org and download a public catalogue of the objects in space. But we know there's a limitation in terms of the capabilities. But now there's a whole community of there's commercial companies now. If you want to go and buy telescope time and get some observations of space, you can do. The EU is also standing up a SSA capability to be able to monitor and protect their assets. And it's only by getting data from multiple sources and bringing it together can you solve this problem. No one person has a solution. But with big data techniques and a mindset that you collaborate rather than you have your own data, you can solve this. And I'm currently chairman of the Space Data Association, which was formed in 2010 by a number of large commercial operators, because we knew sharing our data in real time was a way to help solve some of these issues. So even though we're competitors, I provide my data to my competitors to say where my satellite's going to be in the future so they can avoid it. It's that model that works well. We have a legal framework, and now we have 35 members within the association, and with its remit of protecting the space environment. The problem here is, once you get to too much debris hits debris, and you create this sort of shield around the Earth that you can't get out of, and you deny access to space. So although we use space now, and we have a society built heavily upon it, in future, if we don't look after the space environment, there won't be any space to access. You can't get through the debris field, or your satellite won't last long enough to be useful. So this is really a problem we have to address now, not something we can wait upon. So I'm a strong advocate of good SSA, and also, but with that comes the ability to be able to share information in a transparent and timely way, and to be able to collaborate so sensors from one country can be augmented with sensors from another country, and you create the best possible catalogue you can have for the protection of space. If my competitor, or even if a foe of some sort has a collision, it could become my problem. Their debris can soon hit me. So this is something we have to solve very broadly as space-going operators.
Thank you very much, Mark. Last but certainly not least, yes. James, you have a long and distinguished career in defense and security policy, and I want to ask you to, if you would please comment on, I know you have great interest and knowledge as well about the energy supply and the grid. And how do you see that as an area of national security, and in case of an attack, how resilient is the critical national infrastructure in addressing that?
Thank you. Long ago, before I was born, back in 1859, there was a solar flare. A big solar flare which gave rise to what was called the Carrington Event. And the flare was so big that the aurora borealis could be seen in the Caribbean. And it was so bright that the gold prospectors in the Rocky Mountains woke up at 11 o'clock at night and thought it was breakfast time and began to prepare their breakfast. It had an effect on the electric infrastructure at the time, which, as you will understand, being 1859, was rather rudimentary. It was the telegraph system. And telegraph machines began to operate, even though they were not plugged into the electricity source at the wall, which must have been rather spooky. And some telegraph houses burnt down, a few people died. Since then, we have found new and very clever ways of having a go at our electricity system, not relying on the sun to do it for us. We have discovered the value of nuclear weapons. Exploded above the atmosphere, a nuclear weapon will create an electromagnetic pulse which will do serious damage to the electricity supply at the ground. Or you can have an electromagnetic pulse weapon. You can buy them on the internet, as it happens. I took one into the House of Commons. I got it past the security guards by saying this is experimental equipment. It was experimental because the experiment was to see if I could get it past the security guards, which I could. But with that machine, I could have switched off the Prime Minister's computer. I didn't, but I could have. Electricity has, since 1859, become entirely universal, and we rely on electricity for everything. So now, if you switch off the electricity, you switch off communications. You have no WhatsApp or Instagram. Our children would all have nervous breakdowns. Because you have no communications, you lose the chain of command. If you have no electricity, you have no money. Because the ATM machines won't work and you don't get social security checks anywhere. If you have no money, you worry about what you're going to eat at the weekend, and that creates the impulse towards looting, as we saw in Hurricane Katrina. We have just in time, of course, a wonderful concept that takes out the fat from our economy, but if you don't have food and you don't have fat, then you're in real doo-doos. So, if you have no chain of command, you have great difficulty in calling up the fire brigade, but you wouldn't need to call up the fire brigade anyway, because there wouldn't be any water to put out the fires with, because water is pumped by electricity. You couldn't cool the radioactive cores of the nuclear power stations. That would be fun. The sewage. You couldn't flush your loos, and after a week or so of that, all the sewage, I'm sorry about this so early in the morning, all the sewage solidifies. It takes many, many months to get past that little problem. And there's a cascade effect of everything being dependent on everything else. Now, the issue about this is that the Chinese and the Russians have mapped our critical national infrastructure. They are inside our critical national infrastructure. I don't particularly blame them for that. We've probably done the same to theirs. I don't know, but we probably have. But that means, as the director of the United States National Intelligence said a couple of years ago, he said, despite improving cyber defenses, nearly all information, communication networks, and systems will be at risk for years. I'm a very gloomy person to listen to. I know that. I was once described by the Times as making Eeyore look like a happy clappy type. But it's not easy to switch off our electricity system, but it is possible for a nation state to do it, and soon it will be probably possible to do it on your iPhone. North Korea, in September last year, obligingly issued a statement saying it had tested a multifunctional thermonuclear nuke, not their first language, so forgive them, with great destructive power, which can be detonated at high altitudes for super powerful EMP attack according to strategic goals. So they're even kind enough to tell us what they're going to do. Russians have switched off the electricity in Ukraine briefly. I think that was a practice and a demonstration. Don't mess with us. And if this the issue is this, it seems to me. If this were the way the next World War started, would we want to be able to survive it? I hope the answer to that would be yes. The solution, by the way, is not to say, call out the army. Both of our soldiers are otherwise engaged, and they certainly would be if there were an attack going on. And also, the armed forces themselves are vulnerable. So I think we need to stop denying that this is a real issue. We need to stop saying that this is unlikely to happen. That's the wrong answer to the question, if it did happen, would we want to be able to survive it? And what has all of this got to do with deterrence? I think we have to build a resilient society, which is why I'm so delighted with Elizabeth Braw and her modern deterrence and concentration on resilience. Because if you have a resilient society and you can recover from something like this, that is deterrence by denial. It means that it is likely to have, if you're well prepared for an attack, it will be less effective and therefore less likely to happen. Thank you.